Hey you guys and gals, welcome back to the channel, Jomilla Gaming. Today I'm going to bring a new and exciting video for you. We're going to go over every single champion in the game that has an AOE decreased defense. Probably the single most important buff that you can run in this game. I mean, whether you're in dungeons, whether you're in arena, Doom Tower, I'm sure is going to need it, Faction Wars, wherever you're at in the game, defense down is by far a 5-star debuff. So we're going to touch on each of the champions that do it. Surprisingly enough, there's 30 of them in this game. We'll kind of breeze through the bottom half of the list real quick just to introduce you to the champs. They might not be the best in the game, but they do serve the purpose by putting on that important debuff. Then we'll take our time with the top half of the list. I'll really go through the kits, touch on a little bit how I would probably gear them, and then we'll finish off with the top 3. And the top 3 are pretty sweet. All right, so let's get into the... Right, so first up, I think this guy looks familiar, right? Basically the face of Raid Shadow Legends. And he is a starter champ, and he can start you with decreased defense. So here's his ability: attack 4 times at random, has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. He also has a 30% chance of placing a big version 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns if the target has more than 2 debuffs on him already. So potentially could hit the whole team as he's attacking 4 times at random. Would only be the small version though of decreased defense, and the qualifier to do the big version is just not that good. Galek honestly is built better, or he's a better champion built to do damage than to drop defense, but if he is the only one you have, it might be worth building him to drop the defense. Then up here you have attacks all enemies, has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and he places a 30% increased speed buff on himself for 2 turns, and his A1 is just a 2-hitter. So if being built just to decrease defense, the A1's not going to hit very hard, the A2's not going to hit very hard, and the A3 is really not going to hit very hard. It's just going to place the debuff. If he's built with high accuracy, it does not benefit his other 2 abilities. So that's why we're going to have Galek in here at number 30. One thing you'll notice about this list is it is based solely on the champion's ability to decrease the defense. If 2 champions have the same decreased defense ability, then we're going to look at the rest of their kit and the utility that it would provide if they're built with high accuracy. So we're talking turn meter drops, attack drops, weakens, poisons, HP burns, things like that, which you will see as we get a little farther into this list. So that's Galek. We'll get on to the next one. Alright, next up at number 29 in the Undead Hordes faction is Sorceress, another rare champion. Her decreased defense ability goes as such: she attacks 3 times at random. Each hit is a 30% chance of placing a 60% big version of decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So she's only able to hit at a maximum of 3 bad guys. Only has a 30% chance of placing it, but it is the big version. And when booked, it's on a 4-turn cooldown. So still not the best, but it can be a little bit better than Galek in that it's automatically placing the big version. We look at her A2, attacks 1 enemy 2 times, has a 20% chance of placing an extra hit. If built for accuracy, this move's not going to be all that. And then her A1 attacks 1 enemy, has a 30% chance of placing a decreased speed. So at least that does something for the accuracy. Alright, next up is Banshee. From the Undead Hordes faction as well. She's a rare support. If you look at her A1, attacks all enemies, has a 20% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 1 turn. This is on an A1, so no cooldown. When booked, it's a 30% chance. So that's pretty good. It's pretty solid. It's going to continuously get put on the enemy. If you can build her with a counterattack team or a ally attack team, she's going to be doing this that much more often to keep it up. If you look at her A2, again, attacks all enemies, but this time has a 50% chance of removing 1 random buff. 65% chance when booked. That's going to proc off of accuracy, right? So you're building her high accuracy for the decreased defense. This is also going to benefit from that. Then we look at her A3, attack 2 times at random. Each attack has a 50% chance of placing a block cooldown skills debuff for 1 turn. Another ability that's going to proc off of accuracy, and 3 good debuffs. So she's great. She's going to be a good champion for you guys. Go ahead, if you pull a Banshee and you need somebody to decrease defense, you can feel safe in using her even at the number 28 position. Alright, next up at number 27 is going to be Durang in the Lizardman faction. He is an epic. We look for his decreased defense ability. He's got an attack 3 times at random, has a 50% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack debuff, and a 60% decreased defense debuff. That can be booked up to a 75% chance, and it's on a 3-turn cooldown. Guys and gals, this is insane. 3-turn cooldown, it's going to stay up for 2 turns, and you're just going to keep that thing going. Granted, it doesn't AOE, it's not going to hit everyone. It's only going to hit 3 people max, but it's a good ability. It does both debuffs. Then you look at his next one, attack 1 enemy 2 times, has a when booked 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. And that's also on a 3-turn cooldown. Stun, proccing off of accuracy, is going to help his kid out that much more. And then attack 1 enemy will ignore 25% of the target's defense. In terms of building him for a decreased defense, this A1 isn't going to be all that useful. He also has a nice aura, increase ally speed in dungeons by 23%. So that is beneficial. Right, and that is Durang number 27. Okay, next up at number 26, we have Eviscerator, a rare from the Dark Elf faction. She has an attack all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. That can be booked up to a 75% chance. Now, we look at her passive, a rare with a passive. Attacks an enemy champion with the default skill whenever they are healed or receive a buff. Attacks 1 random enemy if multiple enemies are healed or receive a buff at the same time. We look at her A1, attacks 1 enemy 2 times, has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and has a 50% chance of placing a small version, 2.5% poison debuff for 2 turns if the attack is critical. So, a lot of qualifiers, but the fact that she does an AOE decreased defense is pretty good, even though it is a small version, and she's got some utility with these counter attacks and putting up the poisons. So that is Eviscerator at number 26. Alright, now coming in here at number 25, we have Kryptwich. Kryptwich is in the Night Revenant faction. Yeah, that's right, Night Revenant. There is somebody that drops defense other than Tomb Lord. We can go ahead and look at her ability. It is right here. She only attacks 2 times at random, has a 75% chance, 100% chance when booked, of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. So it's going to guarantee it, usually on 2 enemies. On occasion, she's going to hit the same person twice. It is what it is, but you're kind of guaranteeing 2 enemies are going to get the large version of decreased defense. Then you look at the rest of her kit. Attacks 1 enemy, ignores half their defense if the target is faster than this champion. Not super useful, that one. But her A1, attack 1 enemy, deals 30% more damage if the target has any buffs, will ignore shield and block damage. So you can get a little bit of damage into her kit and have her around 200 accuracy for dungeons at level 20. She's going to hit hard and she's going to drop the defense for you. Kryptwich can be a great champion. I kind of discovered her in Faction Wars and how useful she really can be. So that's number 25, Kryptwich. Okay. Okay, next up at number 24 is Vala in the Barbarians faction. So Vala has an interesting decreased defense move right here on her A2, Crush the Wall. She removes all shield buffs on all enemies, then attacks them, and has a 30% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Now that is a 50% chance when booked up on a 3-turn cooldown, and the fact that it removes shields too is awesome, because this can work great in, say, Arena. When you're facing those teams, especially in early Arena, you fight a lot of teams that are starting with shield sets. Kind of goes away in the mid game, and then as you get back into the end game of Arena, you're going to start seeing those shields again. This can also help out in some of the stages of campaign when you're fighting all those Valkyries. So Vala's not bad, just got to be careful with her because she does have to hit them to place the decreased defense. So green is not going to do very well against blue, magic rather, affinity for this move. But it's a great move. Then you're going to get into her A3. She places a shield buff on herself for 3 turns, equal to 20% of her max HP, and places a 60% increased defense buff on herself for 3 turns as well. And then her A1 attacks 1 enemy 2 times, increases the inflicted damage by 15% if the target's under a shield buff. Granted, that kind of works against her A2. So, you know, she's obviously not the best decreased defense champion in the game, but she's got a neat kit you could definitely find a place for it. That is Vala. Okay, coming in at number 23, we have from the Dark Elf faction, our first legendary of the list, Ray. Now, Ray's obviously a great champion. As I kind of prefaced before in this video, we're looking solely at their decreased defense abilities and how useful they'll be built for high accuracy. So when it comes to Ray, she has a only 30% chance, 50% when booked, of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Now, again, it is an attack, so on Force affinity champions, they're going to be weak hits, where she has a big chance of not placing that decreased defense. You look at the rest of her kit, she attacks all enemies, increases or inflicts 50% more damage against targets under debuffs, and then her A3 attacks all enemies, removes all buffs, and has a 50% chance of placing a freeze. 70% chance when booked. So that's another ability that depends on accuracy. It can be great to be paired with the decreased defense. That's Ray. Let's get to the next one. Okay, next up is Maiden. Maiden is interesting. She is a Sacred Order champion, rare. She's got a cool ability here with Sao Confusion on a 4-turn cooldown. Attacks one enemy, places a weak version, 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Places the same debuff on all enemies for 2 turns if the attack's critical. Who'd have thought? So, pretty cool ability, especially seeing as you can target somebody that's not of a weak affinity and then place it on everyone. Nice advantage. And she also attacks one enemy, decreases max HP, not that good. And then she can do a freeze on her A1. Freeze is very handy and procs off of accuracy as well. So that's right. Next up at number 21, we have Totem. Totem does an AOE, attack all enemies, places a weak version of decreased defense on a 4-turn cooldown. As long as she doesn't weak hit, she's going to place it on everyone. She also attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of removing one random buff. If she removes the buff, then she places a continuous heal on herself for 2 turns. It's on a 3-turn cooldown, but it needs accuracy. Then attacks one enemy, has a 20% chance, 30 when booked, of placing a weak version, 2.5% poison on the target for 2 turns. So 3 abilities that need accuracy. AOE, decreased defense. Totem's pretty solid. We're on to the top 20. First up is Fencer, a rare champion from High Elves faction. She also does an AOE, decreased defense when booked. It's a 100% chance and a 3-turn cooldown. So that's pretty killer. And as long as it's not a weak hit, she's going to get everyone. Then her A2, Pommel Strike, attacks one enemy. It's a 75% chance, 100% chance when booked of placing a stun for 1 turn. Correct me if I'm wrong, this might be the only rare in the game that has a 100% chance of stunning somebody. She also steals 20% of the target's turn meter if the stun debuff gets resisted, right? Because it's 100%. Now her A1 attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 15% chance. Looks like 30% chance when booked of placing a weak version of decreased speed. So Fencer, very underrated decreased defense champion, and that's why she's in at number 20. Alright, and the next legendary to make the list at number 19 is Ursiga Warcaller of the Barbarian faction. Her decreased defense ability has a little bit of a qualifier. I was keeping most of them off of this list, but this qualifier isn't going to get in her way too much when it comes to dungeon runs, when it comes to arenas. She's still going to be able to place it on about half the team, sometimes the whole team in certain arena teams. So she attacks all enemies, does a decreased crit damage and attack for 2 turns, only on targets whose attack is higher than their defense though. So she does a 30% decreased speed and a 60% decreased defense for 2 turns on targets whose attack is equal to or lower than their defense. So a lot of arena teams, a lot of dungeon waves are going to be able to get that debuff placed on them. And she's void, so it won't weak hit. Her A3 is nice. She does an ally protect and a strengthen on herself. Her A1 has a 60% chance when booked of putting a block cooldown skills debuff for 1 turn. She's got a passive that decreases the damage all allies receive from critical hits by 30%. And she'll receive the damage instead though, so you gotta build her tanky. And then Aura of HP. Alright, so next up is Fleshmonger, rare champion from the Skinwalkers faction. He's got a nice decreased defense ability right here. Attacks all enemies. It's a 50% chance. 60, 75. Only 75% chance when booked though, but it is placing the strong version of decreased defense. He's only a rare champion, so that's a pretty decent odd, and it's only on a 4-turn cooldown. Now you've got your A2 ability, increase the attack and crit rate buff on this champion, but he gets an extra turn right after. So if you're doing the decreased defense, then you go into this, you lower that cooldown by 2 turns. And this A1 just attacks one enemy 3 times. So decent champion. It's nice that he does an AOE big version of the decreased defense, and you can get that up to an 80% with masteries. That is Fleshmonger. Alright, next up is where this list really starts to get good. I think any champion here now, if you need a decreased defense, will be viable as your primary one. Some of them still aren't going to be perfect, but they're very viable. If that's your only decreased defense champion, you're not in bad shape. So we're starting off with another new champion, Drowned Bloat Wraith of the Undead Hordes faction. He's a rare void, and his decreased defense ability is attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a weak version 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, but he's also got a 40% chance of placing a fear debuff for 1 turn on enemies under the decreased defense debuff. This is on a 3-turn cooldown AOE. That's insane. I overlooked this guy, I gotta admit, when he was first released, but as I was compiling this list, I kind of reread the kit and was like, wow, that's a great ability. Then we look at his A1, attacks 1 enemy, has a 15% chance of placing a stun for 1 turn, but the chance increases by 5% for each debuff on the target. So potentially he's landing stuns, he's decreasing defense, everything needs accuracy. Could be a good champion. He's got a passive too, heals himself by 15% of his max HP every time he or an ally kills an enemy. Pretty good in dungeons. So that's Drowned Bloat Wraith, very underrated rare. Alright, next up, I think a lot of people know this guy, Mr. Bellower from the Ogre Tribes faction. He's a rare support. He can, on his A3 bowl over, attack all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 25% decreased attack, and a 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense. That is all 100% when booked. They are the small versions, but he's placing both at the same time on a 4-turn cooldown. Look at his A2, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance when booked of placing a small version of decreased speed. And on his A1, attacks all enemies, has a 30% chance of placing a block cooldown skills for 1 turn. If these weren't small versions of the debuffs, Bellower would be one of the best champs in the game. Even though they are small, he's still very useful. He's got a great aura for faction wars, increasing the speed by 15%. I'm pretty sure I use him in the lead of my Ogre Tribes faction wars. So that's Bellower. Okay, next up we have our Lizardman, another legendary in Fushan. So Fushan has an interesting ability. He attacks 4 times at random. Each hit has a 75% chance when booked of placing his big version 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. 4 times at random. You could potentially get it on everybody without weak hits, but it is unlikely. Then you have his A2, Frightful Claws, attacks all enemies 2 times. Each hit has a 35% chance when booked of placing a stun. That's on a 3-turn cooldown, so you can get some good utility out of that. And then his A1 attacks 1 enemy, has a 25% chance of placing an extra hit. So Fushan, not bad, as long as you don't weak hit. Potential to get everyone, most likely you won't. He's got a great aura too. 1-5, we got Zargala of the Orc faction. She's an epic. She has her A3 crack armor on a 4-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies 3 times. The first hit has a 50, 60, 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. So that's a heck of a deal. She's hitting everybody. This move hurts. If you can put some power on her, she will do some damage for you as well. Then her next ability, Devastate, attacks 1 enemy, instantly activates the crack armor skill if the target is killed by this attack. If you notice, crack armor is that defense down, so she can potentially just keep this thing up and going. And then her A1 attacks 1 enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a weaken, the strong version 25%. So 3 good abilities. Zargala is top shelf. Next is Little Miss Farmable. We have War Maiden of the Barbarian faction tribe. You can get her from campaign just by beating it. She's got a 100% chance when booked on a 3-turn cooldown of placing the 60% decreased defense. Now it is a hit, so she potentially can get weak hits and not place this, but it's 100% when it's booked. It's an AOE. Big version of decreased defense on a rare, that's unbelievable, and it's super solid. Her A2 attacks one enemy, plays a 50% increased attack buff on this champion, and plays an extra hit if the attack is critical. The extra hit can't be critical. This doesn't really hit all that hard. Her A1 has a 30% chance of placing a weak poison for one turn. So 2 abilities that do need the accuracy. Big old version of decreased defense on the AOE with the 100% chance. That is War Maiden. Alright, so up next we have the first decreased defense champion that I ever built on my account. Like, built out fully and used for arena. So he's got a great ability here and is Singing Steel. 4-turn cooldown, but has a 100% chance when booked of doing a large version of decreased defense. And if they happen to be under a decreased attack debuff already, he puts them night-night, right? Tayrell the Sandman. He actually does the decreased attack debuff on his A1. So that's where you could be landing it unless you have another decreased attack champion. And then you have his A3, preemptive strike, attacks one enemy, decrease the target's turn meter by 50%. If it fully depletes the turn meter, it's going to put a stun on them for 2 turns. In dungeons, you can really pick on whatever champ is giving you a hard time and essentially just keep them stunned. So it's pretty cool. It's on a 4-turn cooldown as well. And he's got a nice big old beefy aura, 25% defense in all battles. So that's next up is Robar at number 11. Robar is another legendary champion from the Orc faction, Force Affinity, and he's got an AoE on his A2 Wild Swing on a 3-turn cooldown, 100% chance of placing a decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. On his A3 Merciless Assault, he attacks all enemies and the damage increases if the target's under Sleep, Stun, or Freeze debuffs. And on his A1, he attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a stun for 1 turn, and grants an extra turn if the debuff is successfully placed. So this guy will be great in arenas if you can get him up over the 200 accuracy mark for level 20 dungeons and just build him kind of powerful. One downfall to Robar is he is extremely slow at only 87 speed. So you've got to put a lot of speed into his kit, but other than that, it's pretty decent. Especially the fact that he just does the AoE strong version right there on a 3-turn cooldown. So that's Robar. So this next one may be a little controversial, but here, bringing in the number 10 spot, we have Stagnate. I know a lot of people probably have him higher than their top 10, even some as high as top 5. But I'll show you here, and you'll see with the rest of the champs as we go through this list why I have him so low. Although top 10 is very good, and I do still think Stagnate is an excellent defense down champion. You look at his ability here, he attacks all enemies, has a 95% chance when booked. You can get it to 100% with a mastery of dropping the defense and dropping the attack, big versions of each, for 2 turns, and it's on a 3-turn cooldown. So it's an excellent move. Just the fact that it can do weak hits is definitely going to hinder you in arena, and it's going to make it so he's not useful in every single dungeon. Now his A1 attacks one enemy 2 times, 2-hitter, being that it helps him good out in the Fire Knight dungeon. Each hit has a 30% chance, 50% chance when booked of placing a big version of decreased speed. So he does definitely benefit from high accuracy, and he is viable in arena and in dungeons. He has a passive, places a 50% increased accuracy buff on an ally for 1 turn each time the ally has a debuff resisted by an enemy. So Stagnate, wonderful decreased defense champion. We've got him at the number 10 spot. And next up we have Royal Huntsman, High Elf, legendary. This guy has a pretty unique decreased defense ability here. He has attacks all enemies, places a 60% decreased defense debuff on the target for 2 turns if the attack's critical. So obviously we are going to be building him with 100% crit rate, and he has that on a 3-turn cooldown. His A3 on a 5-turn cooldown though attacks one enemy and will ignore defense by 100%. So if you can get some damage in this guy, he can potentially be a huge arena single target nuker. You may want to pair him with somebody like Prince Kaimar just to reset this cooldown and just have him keep plucking people away. Then we look at his A1, attacks one enemy, places a 50% increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns if the attack is critical. He also has a increased spirit ally attack in battles. Not the best aura, but if you can get some damage into this guy with his decreased defense, he's gonna be like a nuker and a debuffer for you. He can potentially be an awesome arena champion, and he's great in dungeons. Alright, next one up we have little honey here, a Bess from the Sacred Order faction. She recently got a little buff to her kit. She can attack all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. That's a 100% chance, by the way, when booked on a 3-turn cooldown. Then you have her A3, Divine Wrath. On a 4-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies. Damage inflicted is proportional to either this champion's attack or the target's defense or attack stat, whichever is highest. And another little secondary effect to this ability deals an extra 30% crit damage if the target's attack is highest, or ignores 30% of the defense if the defense is highest. So you can potentially do, we'll look at her A1-2, attacks one enemy, removes 1 random debuff from this champion and places it on the target. She definitely benefits from high accuracy, and what you can do is essentially ignore the attack stat and focus on this, basically using their attack or their defense as for like your multipliers, right? So a Bess can really nuke. You can build her high accuracy with low attack to make sure you're landing your debuffs, and then just build her high crit rate, and she's gonna come in and slam. So a Bess, really fun champion. I hope I pull her one day, because I will definitely be using her. Next up, it's gonna be one of my favorite epics in the game. Definitely one of my favorite decreased defense champions. Spider from the Dark Elf faction. He's an epic. So we look at his kit here, his A3, he's got a 60% chance, 100% chance when booked of placing the big version of decreased defense on all the enemies for 2 turns. He's also got a 70% chance when booked of placing the small version of weaken. So that's going to hit most of the bad guys, and it's just going to make you slam even harder. Now we look at his A2 Calamity. This is on a 3-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing the strong version of decreased attack. That he is going to land on almost everyone as well. But the other cool part that gets overlooked on this ability is he decreases the duration of all buffs by 1 turn. So you're thinking like any enemy that's had a chance to go around once, they've only got 1 turn left on their buffs, he's going to take it off. If they haven't gone around yet, he's just going to make it so that debuff's only for 1 turn. And somewhere I found a lot of usefulness for him was in my arena offense team. What you do is you drop that defense first, you go around, you hit everybody. You think Skull Crowns, right? You get them down to 1 HP, and she's sitting there with Unkillable on. You're running into a lot more swift parry sets on opponents now as well. So they do the same thing as Skull Crown. They get down to 1 HP, they got Unkillable on. And if they can nuke, and you don't have high defense, you're gonna die. So what this does is this takes that Unkillable off of them. He doesn't even need to hit hard, he just has to do 1 damage, and he will kill them before they get a chance to come around and kill you. I found this so useful in really the Skull Crown teams, and it just makes your fights faster. You're not sitting there forever doing your arena matches. Then we look at his A1, attacks 1 enemy, has a 70% chance when booked of just removing 1 random buff from the target. Really comes in handy in like the keeps, especially you think like the magic keep, because he's going to be pulling that shield off the big old boss. Really comes in kind of handy everywhere too. You think the opponents that have like immunity sets on, shields, all kind of different things. Spider has a lot of usefulness in this game. And then you look at his aura. Speed auras are always king. You know, speed is king in this game, and it increases the ally speed in dungeons by 25%. So that's Spider. Going to be one of my favorite legendaries in the game, somebody that I actually have, Tomb Lord. So he's a Knight Revenant and Spirit Affinity. He has an excellent ability on his A3 called Blight. I'll read this to you a little bit out of order so it makes more sense. When booked, he has a 100% chance of placing the big version of decreased attack and defense. It is a place, not a hit, so it's going to guarantee it falls on him as long as he has the accuracy. The second half of this ability is he decreases the turn meter of all enemies with less than 50% HP by 100%. So if they're under half health, they're not going to go. And what that does is it grants an extra turn for him if the enemy's turn meter is decreased by this skill, therefore lowering the cooldown of this to more of a 4-turn. This would be better if it was naturally at a 5-turn cooldown. Plarium, I know you're not watching my little 20 view video, but if I ever get big, I'm going to bring this back up. Buff Tomb Lord, he needs it. Then over here on his A2 Death Burst, it's a 3-turn cooldown, attacks one enemy, has a 70% chance of placing 2 5% poison debuffs on all enemies for 1 turn. If the attack's critical, he places 4 of those poison debuffs. So you're definitely going to build him with 100% crit. He doesn't need damage, he just needs the crit rate. You can do like crit rate gloves and then focus more on your HP and defense and accuracy to stay alive. Then you've got your A1, attacks one enemy 3 times, places a big version of decreased speed on the target for 2 turns if the attack's critical. So again, all the more reason to build him with crit. He's got a nice little aura here, increase ally defense in arena battles by 42%. That's huge. Not that we really use defense auras in arena very much, but if you did, you'd have a lot coming from it. Alright, so on to the next one. Alright, next up, from Skinwalker's faction is Coronar. Now, this guy used to be at like the top of my most wanted list. He got a little nerf, and I kind of discovered some better champions as I progressed through the game, but I would still build him immediately if I got him. And we'll get into his kit, you'll see why. First thing, his Battle Walt attacks all enemies. Placed a big version of decreased attack on all enemies for 2 turns. And then places the big version of decreased defense debuff on targets who got the attack placed on them. Pretty good ability. He's a Void champion, so he's never going to get a weak hit, right? It's always going to land. And then we have his A2, Beastly Bellow. Has a 75% chance of placing a Provoke debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. That books up to a 100%. Then he places a Block debuffs and a 60% increase defense buff on himself for 2 turns. He has a little secondary effect if Manaya is on the same team, but we're not going to focus on that right now. Then we have his A1, attacks all enemies with a 50% chance of decreasing each target's turn meter by 5%. Again, more synergy if Manaya is on the team, but we're not worried about that. Counter attacks when hit by enemies under decreased attack, decreased defense, or decreased speed debuffs. And then places a 60% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns if he kills an enemy. So he's got a lot going on with his kit. This one being accuracy. And this one needing accuracy as well for the provoke. And his A1 needing accuracy to decrease the turn meter. So he's an HP champion, high HP, decent speed. So you're going to build him with a ton of HP, a ton of speed, and a ton of accuracy. Unfortunately, he starts with 0 as a legendary. That's this face. Anyway, that's Coronar. Let's get into our next. Next up, we're back to the Dark Elves faction with Ghostborne, legendary. We start off by looking at his A3. Attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Also places a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. Now something that definitely should not be overlooked is this middle line here. The debuff cannot be resisted. So Ghostborne can be built as a nuker. He's got decent attack, decent multipliers, good speed. You can put him with high attack and high crit damage and still land this decreased defense debuff on the entire enemy team. That saves you an extra spot basically on your team. He's not necessarily taking up that debuff role. He's going to take up a second nuker role. You look at his A2, attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked of placing a heal reduction. That debuff is not that important. Even on the dungeons where like it could be used, like Spider and Fire Knight, the more late game teams still don't have a heal reduction in there, not on purpose anyway. Then we go and we look at his A1, has a 100% chance of placing a decreased defense on single target, although this one does need accuracy. So a couple different ways of building Ghostborne. If I pull him, I believe I will be building him as a complete and total nuker, not worrying about accuracy because I'm guaranteed to put on this debuff. You see a lot of him in the top gold 4. You see a lot of him in, videos. I haven't necessarily pushed Platinum Arena yet, but you see him on a lot of those Platinum Arena teams as well. He has a decent aura for accuracy and faction crypts, but you're probably never going to use it. Top 3. All right, so coming in at number 3, I think a lot of people know this lady, this little witch, Madame Cerise, however you say her name. Love this chick, right? She's got an A3, removes all buffs from enemies, places a big version of decreased attack and decreased defense on all enemies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. This ability is overpowered. They tried to nerf it by bringing the turn down 1, and what they did was they nerfed her in dungeons. But what they needed to do was nerf her in arena. This ability is way too overpowered for arena for an epic champion. She should be a legendary champion with this ability, or they need to get rid of this ability. That being said, she's on my main arena team because how can you use somebody else? It's kind of hard not to. Though the reason she's in at number 3 because I do have her as the number 1 arena decreased defense champion. She does not have the best utility in the dungeons. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. It only lasts for 2 turns. There is champions that are going to keep the decreased defense debuffs up longer than Madam. But we get into the rest of her kit. It's all good. This part here, Trick and Treats, does attacks all enemies to 40% chance, 50 when booked, of stealing 1 random buff from each target. That's a steal, so the buff's going to come on her. It also places a block debuffs buff on all allies for 2 turns if any buff is stolen, and places a true fear debuff for 1 turn on enemies who have a buff stolen. Then we look at her A1, attacks 1 enemy, has a 20% chance of placing fear for 1 turn. The chance increases to 30% if the target's under 1 debuff, and to 45% if the target's under 2 or more debuffs. Look at her passive, puts a shield on herself every turn equal to 10% of her max HP, but when she's attacked, while that shield buff is up, it has a 35% chance of putting a fear debuff on the attacker. So Madame Cerise, wonderful champion, in our number 3 spot. In at number 2, we have a champion that's very high on my most wanted list in Venus, from the Sacred Order tribe. She does, let's find it. Here we are. Attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance when booked on a 3-turn cooldown of placing the big decreased defense and the big weaken. Amazing ability. She's void, so she can't get weak hits. She's going to put on the 2 biggest I'ma smack you debuffs and make the rest of your team really do some good damage. We look at the rest of her kit, starting with the back end. Well, this only works with Cupidus. We're not worried about that. She attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance, 75 when booked, of putting an HP burn debuff on them for 2 turns. So obviously needs accuracy as well. Her A1 attacks 1 enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 50% chance of putting a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. And then she's got an HP battle, or HP in all battles aura. So Venus is awesome. She's, wonderful for clan boss, wonderful for dungeons, wonderful for arena. She is good everywhere. And that's why she makes the number 2 spot on this list. Okay, and into number 1, Mr. Dracomorph. Definitely near the top of my most wanted list, probably most of you guys and gals as well. We look at his ability here, places a 25% weaken and a 60% decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. That's a place, not an attack, so it's going to go on everyone. It's on a 3-turn cooldown. This ability is insane. Then we have his A2, Poison Jaws, also on a 3-turn cooldown, attacks 4 times at random. Each hit puts a 5% poison debuff for 3 turns. 3 turns. That's so much. Then we get to his A1, attacks 1 enemy, damage increases by 10% for each debuff on the target. Will attack 1 random enemy with any surplus damage if the target is killed. Damage inflicted is equal to triple the surplus damage, but the surplus damage cannot be critical. He did recently get a debuff, or a nerf rather. I'm pretty sure this surplus damage could critical before, and he was just even farther in the top spot. But he still hits hard. He's great for dungeons, great for arena. The best champion, I think, for clan boss. Dracomorph is going to take in our number 1 spot. But I got something sneaky for you after that. Okay, so depending on when you're watching this video, there could be a new number 1 for this list. I'm on Skylink's gaming website. You can see the link right here at the top. They have all the information here on Lydia, so let's go ahead and get into her kit really quick. She's a legendary dark elf. You're going to be getting this champion for finally completing Faction Wars 21 for every faction. So she's a very late game champion. But if you look at her kit here, it's ridiculous. we'll go ahead. Her Siren's Wail attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance, we're assuming 100 when booked, of placing the big version of decreased defense and weaken. She's a void, so no weak hits. But at the same time, she's going to put a strengthen buff and an increased speed buff on all allies. So you got Arbiter with the turn meter, and to Lydia with the speed and the strength. The speed, the strengthen, the decreased defense. You probably don't need a second speed booster anymore, but you'd have to play with your speeds and see. We got cooldown on 4. It may even become less when booked, but we'll see. Then we have her passive. She denies enemy revive attempts. Works even if she's dead. If she's alive when an enemy revive is denied, she revives all her dead allies with half HP and 50% turn meter, and grants an extra turn if there are no dead allies. If this champion is dead when an enemy revive is denied, yeah, revives her with 50% HP and 50% turn meter, and the skill ignores block revive. So, you know, just a little overpowered. Then we got our A3, Nullification, attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit has a 75% chance, assuming 100 when booked, of putting on a big old poison sensitivity for 2 turns. Second hit has a 75% chance of placing a block buffs and block cooldown skills debuff for 2 turns. Just wonderful. Then her A1, Oppression, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of putting on a fear debuff. Hopefully that's not 100% chance when booked, that would be ridiculous for an A1, but has a 75% chance of increasing the duration of any poison sensitivity debuffs as well. I feel like it's going to be 100% chance when booked. I feel like it is. So anyway, she attacks champions with this skill whenever they place a freeze, stun, fear, or true fear debuff on an ally. The number of attacks increases according to how many debuffs are placed at the time. 1 attack for each of those debuffs placed. The first attack will target the attacker, while all extra hits will attack random enemies. So this chick's overpowered. We're going to go ahead and assume that she will take over the #1 spot as soon as she comes out. Well, that's the video, guys and gals. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking around. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to see some debates down in the comment section as far as who you think should be higher or lower on this list. Also, if you leave me a like and subscribe, once I get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this background here, grab a green screen, probably get a better camera, and really dig into this content creator business. I think I can bring some good info to the table. Once I get some better equipment, get a little more comfortable making the videos, they're going to have a lot more little funny tidbits and things in there like that. But alright, thanks again for watching. I will see y'all later.